Say something?
Yes. Yes, she confessed it when we were braiding each other's hair and talking about you.
God don't ever change, Alucard. Hey folks, MangaKamen back, and we're finally revisiting an old topic, Castlevania Nocturne. A few years ago, I actually reviewed the first season of the show, which, while it had some really great highs, had some stuff that kinda irked me.
But fuck it.
And while I was very critical in my video, I still found some positives in the overall product, despite the issues I had. Now that we've gotten to Season 2, we're at a crossroads again, because in all honesty, while I will say the season is actually better than the first one, it still has its problems with it that I know some people will not like me talking about, especially since looking online, there are people who are proclaiming to be a 10 out of 10 experience with it being the best they have ever seen. Listen, as I say in all my reviews, my goal isn't to put down anyone for liking something that I have criticism of, but to merely voice my opinion for entertainment value. If you disagree with my personal taste, that's perfectly fine, but in all honesty, if everyone held the same opinion, life would be boring, wouldn't it? To get matters out of the way, no, I do not believe this season is total garbage. Far from it, in fact. Like I said, I view it as an improvement over the first one, but that doesn't mean it doesn't have its issues, and just because I'm focusing on the negative, that doesn't denote that I think this season is bad. But just in case, I think we'll start off with a couple positives here and there.
Am I right?
Hi, I'm MangaKamen, beware of spoilers, and some graphic stuff too, I suppose.
So you've made your choice.
One thing I want to get out of the way is that the writers for this season have actually seemed to realize you don't need to have words to have a strong scene. A big criticism that I and many others had with the original season was...
But fuck it.
Yeah, that line. While there are still some F-bombs being dropped here and there, it's more or less the placement of them that really makes it all the difference, and especially when it's done in a fight scene, or rather the lack of them in a fight scene. Since when looking at the final battle against Erzsébet and Drolta, Richter legitimately came off as a badass for the lack of actual dialogue, and when words were actually used,
I will kill you, Olrox. One day. But not today.
it had a lot more weight to it, and it made the scene a hell of a lot more memorable for actual good reasons. Something that a lot of writers need to understand is that sometimes what's not being said can be just as powerful as the right words chosen, and it really feels like a lot of the original fluff from the first season was called out to make them choose the right words here. When that's done, it can really open up a lot more characterization for our cast, especially between Richter and Annette, which, while I have an issue with how their relationship developed in a pacing sense, it was genuinely cute and funny to see them grow closer and develop a relationship. Look, everybody knows that the best place to take a girl for a date is in the catacombs surrounded by skeletons and dead vampires. It's the perfect place to kiss the girl. That's where I took my first date, and she issued a restraining order on me for it. Memories. Though one thing I will say is that the show was infinitely better with Alucard being brought back. With an additional 300 years of experience under his belt, there's this refinement to the character, and while he's a much more serious person than he was in the original series, where he was essentially a late teenager, Alucard still has his moments of levity and snark. I mean, just look at that smile as he talks about Leonardo da Vinci and how he couldn't score the Mona Lisa. Speaking of old men, Juste is back, and like the old Alucard, having an old man like Juste is also comedy gold.
Never understood that vow of chastity business, to be honest. Doesn't sound healthy to me. Not having children, though. That makes a lot of sense.
His scene at his wife's grave was also very heartwarming, probably one of my favorite scenes in the entire show, and considering that one of the other criticisms I saw online was the lack of Juste being in the show, this really felt like taking the best route with the character and incorporating him into the plot as a mentor of magic to Maria. Character design wise, while most of the main cast is the same as the first season, there are a few that I want to note. Like, there was something that was just off with Richter's design in the first season for me. Maybe it was because of the art style in comparison with Castlevania's more grounded artwork in the original games, but then I realized it was the sleeves. The moment that Richter's sleeves were ripped off, the design just clicked with me. While the design of Richter isn't a one-for-one match of the original one, because of those design elements being reflected in the final fight, it really elevated the design to one that I really love. I swear, if this gets a third season and they put those sleeves back on him, there will be bloodshed. Also, it's good to see Juste in his bright red coat. One thing that I really appreciate is that each character has their own designated color that makes them stand out. Richter blue, Maria pink, Juste red, Alucard black, and Annette yellow. I didn't really give a lot of praise to design work with the character outfits benefits in my last video, so I wanted to at least bring it up here. In addition, I really liked Annette's design when she was possessed by Sekhmet. Like, her design is fine when it's regular, I guess. I'm not a huge fan, but I think she looks a lot better with longer hair. I don't know, to me, I think the long hair was a good choice, and I was kind of sad that she didn't keep the length when she returned to normal. And of course, the action scenes were really good, though I would like to say that near the end, there were a few times that it went on a bit too much, and there were some points they made me go, just kill her already. There are a lot more positives, but I don't want to spend too much time on it, and I want to make it clear that even if I have issues, it doesn't make me think the series is bad. Which is a good transition into the negatives. Brace yourself, boys and girls, we're about to get bloody here.
And I could use some help.
With a lot of shows, there tends to be an issue with pacing, and when a YouTuber or a critic tells you that, more often than not, they'll say that without explaining what pacing means, and will often allow the audience to come to their own conclusion on the matter, so that way they can have some accountability dismissal. Well, I don't want to be that kind of YouTuber, so let's give a specific definition. Pacing in a writing sense refers to the rhythm of the entire story or element, or how a chain of events fall into place. Essentially, it's how fast or slow the story is moving for the reader or viewer, and this can be a subjective thing. Especially for me, I think one of the biggest issues when it comes to pacing is the relationship between Richter and Annette. Now, to make it clear, my issue isn't them falling in love with each other. That's to be expected if you're familiar at all with the original Castlevania story. To me, the issue is how quick they are to say they love each other and hook up. While we're not given a whole lot on the passage of time, the series essentially starts back up right on the tail end of the previous season, and it feels like the whole secondary season takes place over the course of a few days. I'm not saying it does as fact, but that's how the story is presented to me, and it certainly does feel that way as well. I'm not saying that Richter can't develop feelings for Annette, and there are scenes that are genuinely nice that show that they are bonding, but it feels a bit rushed with that regard. Let's do a quick comparison with Trevor and Sypha's relationship.
I never used to, and then all this happened, and then you happened. Me? Yes, you! I was nice! And then I met you, and now I'm like you.
Oh, so it's my fault.
They had a similar dynamic to Richter and Annette, with the two sniping at each other and having this friction between them, but eventually the two, after traveling for so long, began to develop feelings for each other after the big battle.
You like looking at me.
I'm not going to...
Because if you do, you'll crack like an egg.
Yes!
Now, one can argue that since there was more time dedicated to the original series, and we have the wonder of time skips, it could make the relationship a lot more believable. And I agree, but that's the point. It still doesn't make the relationship between Richter and Annette come off as a bit too fast here, and I agree. However, that's my point. With the way it is right now, the relationship between Richter and Annette comes off a bit too fast here. There's still a lot the two don't really know about each other, and it just feels a bit too quick for my tastes. Granted, this is just a me thing, but it feels like a bit too fast. The same can be said with Maria and killing her father. Not helped is that Maria and the priest pretty much become disconnected from the plot as well, which was one of the bigger issues with the last season of the original Castlevania, where you had the main cast broken up and doing different things. Listen, there's a reason why there's a rule called don't split the party in D&D, and to me, because of this division in the plot, it really makes it hard for me to really care for Maria's story, since we're trying to stop the world from being taken over by vampires. Do we really have time for this? And it makes it a bit more disappointing since the priest dies so early in the series. I almost feel like it's a bit of a missed opportunity to have him be eliminated so early, and in a way that, while cool to look at, should have been saved for a later episode. Like, the series, to me, was trying to go with an angel and the devil on the shoulder motif for Maria, with the recently turned vampire mother acting as the devil and Juiced acting as the angel. It's an interesting concept that, while it gets fleshed out a little, happens a bit too quick, and we're dividing our attention between the two plot lines. If anything, I wish instead of jumping in between during each episode would have been dedicated to each group so we'd have our focus on them. Then there's Edouard's story, which focuses on him rallying the night beasts that he's a part of to fight against the other night beasts that are loyal to the vampires. Honestly speaking, I found them to be the most boring parts. It doesn't even really play that big of a role outside of making the night beasts not show up in the battle in Paris. And considering that Edouard doesn't even interact with the rest of the cast until the end of the series, it just felt pointless to me. Then again, my issues are with the inconsistencies with the night beasts and how some get to keep their souls and memories and others don't. It just feels way too inconsistent, and that messes with the pacing as well. Though I would say the pacing is the smallest of the issues I have, since the personal gripe, and to be fair, near the end it does improve a little bit. Granted, I wasn't a huge fan of all the spiritual world stuff that happened when it took up a lot of time, but then again, just a preference. If you enjoyed it, that's fine with you. Don't worry about me.
Gasp!
So, one of my complaints for the last season was the villains. Basically, though, that complaint really hasn't changed. Elizabeth as a villain is still as dry, stiff, and boring as a plank of wood.
Plank says you should be more careful not to lose things. You're bugging me, man. Take a hike!
But hey, considering that she's not actually the big bad villain of this season, well, that makes sense.
You're so evil, it's boring!
But I'd argue that just because you have her being a red herring, that doesn't mean you can't make a good character out of her. Hell, I find Elizabeth's past to be boring. A woman locked up in a tower after she apparently killed a ton of kids. She's not a very interesting character or villain, and being candid here, because of that, the twist of Drolta being the actual mastermind behind this, it didn't have the same punch to me as I've seen online. Then again, when we're opening a good number of episodes focused on Drolta's backstory, it doesn't really take a genius to figure out that she's going to be the actual big bad. She's got more screen time than Elizabeth, she actually has her backstory fleshed out a bit too much, she's a lot more active in the plot. Oh, and what happened to her at the end of the first season? It's okay, folks, she got better, and is no longer a vampire. This wasn't a part of her plan, by the way. Drolta got frickin' lucky that she was able to be revived as a night beast creature and still managed to keep her original consciousness and not actually be controlled by the priest. I'm not saying you can't have a character like Drolta work. She's being portrayed as a puppet master holding onto the strings of Elizabeth, grooming her to be a vessel for the body and blood of Sekhmet.
When you see something, say something, report that groomer.
I'm not saying that sort of thing can't work for a villain, but what doesn't work for me is that it feels like a real major backpedal. Season 1 ended with Drolta's death, and from a mere Google search you can see people saying it was a mistake because Drolta was a fan favorite character. Gee, I wonder why. I think she just clicked with a number of people. It's probably not the case since writing and animation take a hell of a lot of time to do, but there's this nagging feeling in the back of my brain. The same feeling when someone who writes fanfiction kills off an OC and then brings him back a few chapters later being super strong this time and can kick all the main characters' asses so easily. Again, that part is just me having this feeling. I'm not saying that's the case. Drolta is obviously a lot more interesting villain between the two vampires. But her getting killed and then revived just makes me shake my head at her as a villain. She got super lucky that she got revived in the first place.
Just standing up for my rights as a consumer.
And even more so with her origin, where a vampire just showed up after the massacre of her people. Now, with every story, there's going to be a bit of coincidence thrown to the mix. That's understandable. But I feel like there's a bit too much with Drolta.
It's an absolute wonder to me that you've all managed to live this long.
I want to say it doesn't diminish her as a villain, but I don't really find her all that compelling.
Every fucking TV show now, they rub your nose in it.
I'd already explained that I found the priest's death to be done too early in Olrox. Well, can you even call him a villain anymore? He is more so willing to play both sides and do things that benefit the good guys, so it hardly says that he's a villain, especially when the story goes out of its way to make the character sympathetic so much. Now, the villains aren't the worst I've seen in fiction. I've definitely seen a lot better and a lot worse. Hell, arguably even in this own series.
And now, I bring your death. You have your chance.
But with all the quote-unquote foreshadowing by showing Drolta's backstory that only we, the audience, get to know and not the actual protagonist, it really kneecapped the so-called twists. If we're getting all this information about a character, especially in the second season, that's an obvious sign that they're a more important character that we, the audience, need to focus on. And since Drolta is an antagonist, that already signified to me that she was the big bad because she was getting all this screen time. Not that it wasn't a shock, considering that Elizabeth is about as interesting as a dirt-covered rock. It's not clever to me that you made her a red herring because she really wasn't all that compelling of a character to distract the audience. Hell, if we really want to get into this, if you really want the twist to work, you'd have to at the very least make Elizabeth into a somewhat interesting character for the rug pull to actually have meaning. Because you need to have Elizabeth be interesting to distract the audience from what Drolta is doing. Because most of the attention is focused on Drolta because she's a much more interesting character, the twist doesn't work and ultimately undermines the villains even further.
Choose your character.
I think what the biggest issue is, again, something that I have a problem with a lot of media nowadays, the number of characters in the story and how they're utilized. Do not get me wrong, between things like Yu-Gi-Oh! GX or Ruby, both of which I believe have to be some of the biggest offenders of this issue that I've covered, Castlevania Nocturne is simple in comparison, but still has the makings of the issue. Let's count it down, shall we? The main cast includes Richter, Maria, Annette, Edouard, Alucard, Olrox, Emmanuel, Terra, Just, Mizrak, Drolta, Erzabet, and Sekhmet. If you want to include her, I guess. That's 12 to 13 characters in the main cast, and not counting characters who are just one-offs or nameless, that's actually quite a big cast to juggle around with 8 episodes to work with. I brought up the pacing before, but because we keep jumping to other characters and include things that ultimately didn't matter, it bogs down the plot. Take for example the scenes with Olrox and Mizrak. This is a me thing, but they felt sidelined within their own plot of love and betrayal to the point where the scenes came off as more fluff than anything else, ending with Olrox saving Mizrak from dying by turning him into a vampire and Mizrak mooning the audience. I guess we had to get one bare ass in the show somehow, I suppose. Olrox, for an important character in Richter's life, feels sort of like an afterthought, because while he does show up in the final battle and essentially breaks the night creature making machine, I think he does destroy the book to it. That's really all he does this season, at least anything of note. But that's kind of paltry in comparison to Maria's story, which felt rushed. We had the whole Terra being turned to a vampire and then trying to interact with her daughter, teaching her to become a stronger summoner and magician, with Just making sure that Maria doesn't go off the deep end. Oops. Then she comes back, learning to control her powers, mostly off-screen. Then there's also her mother, recently turned, and going back and forth between wanting to be with her daughter or trying to corrupt her. It feels a bit rushed and jumbled, especially when it's competing with the other team of Richter, Annette, and Alucard, Olrox and Mizrak, Edouard and the Night Beast, and then the 2 villains. Things do get done, mind you, but it really feels like this season should have had another episode or 2 to really flesh out the themes that were in the episodes, as well as expand upon what was actually happening. Like the theme of revolution, something that the writers wanted to depict, but when they give conflicting scenes, such as showing the revolution was willing to turn Maria away and then get slaughtered by the revived Drolta, it kinda gives me a little bit of an odd feeling here. You can also argue that the theme of revolution was then depicted in Edouard's story, but that also gets conflicted since he's allowed to sing, can talk to the priest, and the priest doesn't want to put him in a cage. It comes off as a little messy and confusing to me, and I feel like the themes and the characters can't really get a proper chance to breathe and explore the themes fully. Hell, Maria as a character is just puzzling to me, particularly when she makes a hypocritical statement about how the people who aided the vampire should be in the guillotine, blatantly ignoring the fact that Alucard is standing right there and she and her crew are helping a vampire for the good reasons. I guess he's just one of the good ones, I suppose. That was sarcasm, by the way. I know it's a foreign language on the internet. I understand that Maria is a young character, and while I did find her story to be interesting on the thematic level, and how it could have gone further, her personality and such was a bit of a put-off to me, and ultimately hypocritical. Hypocritical characters can work. Hell, even the priest is a hypocrite, but that hypocrisy needs to be pointed out, especially when it's for a protagonistic character. But that's my thoughts with that. The only characters I feel didn't really get that treatment are oddly enough Just and Alucard, since they're more or less support characters in the story and already have their development completed, so you don't really need to expand on their characters further since they're not the focus. But they still have some really good scenes and at least don't need to take up a lot of the time to help establish their growth and characterization, so they don't really get all that impacted by the pacing issues, for the most part. Castlevania Nocturne was an interesting beast when it comes to entertainment. I do not think it's a total garbage fire, and there were plenty of times where I was entertained with the characters and action, though I would say that as a story, I wasn't really all that enthralled with the overall plot. Mostly due to the fact that we spent a bit too much time with the red herring of a villain Erzabet, and the fact that we were getting more backstory on Drolta before the episodes began didn't act as foreshadowing, more or less saying to me that she was the actual big bad. But because of that, it didn't make the stakes all that interesting to me because, again, she died at the end of Season 1 and was brought back. Nocturne does have a lot of good scenes to it, and its action is pretty good, all things considered. But when I think about everything it was combined as is, it doesn't really ring true to me. There are intriguing ideas, but most of the time they're rushed and not fully explored. This doesn't ruin Nocturne for me, but it does make it a bit hard for me to swallow as a perfect show, as the internet space has declared it. And hey, the original Castlevania series, while I would consider to be better overall, did have its own issues. I talked about the series a long time ago on this channel, back when it first started, but if you guys are interested in me revisiting the original Castlevania, put in the comments, Die, monster! You don't belong in this world! And if we get 5k likes on this video, I'll gladly revisit it. Back to Nocturne though. I think the biggest issue I have is with all those loose threads that were being left. They're being teased for a possible third season with the inclusion of Old Man Coyote, or Tara still roaming about as a vampire, or Richter and Annette heading back to Annette's home to continue their adventure, or Olrox and Richter's snafu not actually being fulfilled right now, which, if there is a third season of this, I'm not sure I want there to be. Let's consider the games, and let's consider what would be the game that I'm sure a ton of people would love to get an adaptation of. Symphony of the Night. Arguably one of the most influential games in not just the series, but also the gaming world itself. I personally wouldn't mind a season that focused on Alucard trying to go through a castle to prevent the revival of his father by a guy named Shaft.
Who is the man that would risk his neck for the man?
Shaft!
And saving Richter in the process, who has gone missing. Lord knows for a series called Castlevania, there was a distinct lack of an actual castle being used here in Nocturne, which I think is the real issue I have with Nocturne. Yeah, we have the characters, they have the names and the looks, but it doesn't really feel like Castlevania to me, and I know that's such a superfluous statement to make, since what can you really say to qualify what is and isn't Castlevania? I guess what I'm saying, it feels more like a vampire drama that has Castlevania theming to it than an actual Castlevania story. Does that make the show bad? No, I don't believe it does. There are plenty of positive elements to it. I even highlighted a few of them at the beginning of the video. But it really feels like it's donning the name of Castlevania and using its characters to tell a story that isn't really invoking the same feeling of exploring a dark castle plagued with monsters and delving into the mystery of what can happen in an area like that. Back when the original and Nocturne came out, there was always a phrase that a story like that would be boring. And to that I will always say it is just dumb to make that claim, because there have been plenty of stories that were compelling that take place in just one location. To disregard that shows a lack of creativity and introspection if you ask me. Now, is what I described what I wanted from a Castlevania adaptation? Yes, obviously. Does that mean because I didn't get what I wanted that it makes what we got bad? No. No, it does not. But that doesn't mean it can't have an effect on how I view the series. All in all, I chalk this up to being slightly incompatible with me. I enjoyed a good chunk of what I saw, but when put all together, it was a bit more flawed than what people were hyping it up to be on the internet. Still, if you can get past all those issues, then I would happily recommend the series to you. But as always, folks, thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoy yourself with the series should you choose to watch it. I'm MangaKamen, and thanks for watching. Laters!